IVM.
This is Storytellers and Storysellers live on tape. You're listening to Vineet Kanabar on the IVM Podcast Network. We are in studio recording in the new year. We've done some fantastic episodes this year so far. If you haven't checked them out already, just scroll up, check them out, see which ones you like, or just stay with this one. This episode is going to be amazing. I have someone sitting across me who has kind of taken the world of content by storm in a very interesting sort of mix of culturally relevant content that's come through. Have you heard of Chhello Show? Wait, let me do that in English. Have you heard of the last film show? It was India's entry to the Oscars this year. It was in consideration till the very last minute, not like some other claimants who've claimed their films were in consideration when they were not. The last film show, a beautiful story about a 9-year-old Gujarati boy called Samay in a village in Saurashtra called Chalala, who discovers movies in the most beautiful way possible. I'm not going to describe the film to you. Go watch it. It's on Netflix in Hindi and Gujarati. Please extend a storyteller's welcome to Dheer Momaya, who's the founder-producer at Jugaad Motion Pictures.
That's right.
And is my guest on this episode. Dheer, welcome to the show. So glad to have you on.
Thank you for having me, man. I'm super excited to be here.
Very excited to talk to you. I have so many things to ask you because usually when I talk to senior producers or people from the production business, they come with 25 years of experience, right? You talk to a Vivek Krishnani, right? And he can tell you stuff about movies that you didn't know existed.
Absolutely.
But then when you have someone like Dheer, yourself, sit and talk to us about a young person's view on content, I think there's insights, there's opportunity that we can spot for maybe what will be our content landscape for the next 20 years. So very excited for our chat. But before all of that, and I know as a producer, you'll understand this, we need to make money. That's why we need to put ads and we need to take a break. Okay, so we'll do a quick break. Back talking to Dheer Momaya right after these messages. Go nowhere. And we're back. Dheer Momaya is here from Jugaad Motion Pictures. Help me start this episode by talking about how does it feel to have a film? I ask you the most routine PR question. But no, let me ask you this and let me set this question up, right? Like any great work of art, there is a lot of labor that goes into making something like Chhello Show, right? Mm-hmm. Film was ready March 2021. You had a Tribeca premiere in June. Film went theatrical this year. Film went to the Oscars. The entire effort, right? I mean, I think it's very well understood about how you make a film and how you put it out there and the festival circuit and stuff like that. What's not really well understood is what happens when your film gets nominated for an Oscar, right? I think in public consciousness, our memory is, Amir Khan did a lot of work when Lagan was nominated. And that's all we know.
Yeah.
Right? We know.
He did, yeah.
He probably hosted a few shows, which Priyanka Chopra hosted a show for Chhello Show as well, right? She did. But what exactly happens? What does a producer then do once you know that your film is in the running to be part of the most celebrated awards in the movie business? What does a producer do then?
That's the secret sauce. I'm going to charge every producer money to tell them what I did. No, I'm just kidding. Look, I think that first of all, getting to the Oscars or going there is just sort of a milestone, right? Like we're not making movies for it to get awards.
Absolutely.
We're making movies to find audiences. We're like those storytellers, as storytellers were 2,000 years ago who were telling stories by mouth. They wanted as big as an audience in the village that they could find. Similarly, we want to find as many villages who'll watch our movie, right?
Sure.
And having an Oscar sort of becomes, or getting any award rather, going to a festival or getting any award becomes a milestone that lets you find a larger audience and lets a larger audience discover your title or your movie. So I feel like when we did get selected as India's entry, it was overwhelming because there were so many interesting films that were competition for us and so many popular titles that people wanted to see go to that stage that didn't make it. So there was automatically a lot of backlash, and instead of being celebrated by the country, we were sort of being really pinpointed at, sort of felt insulted, sort of felt like we didn't deserve to be there. And that's not nice, because most other countries in the world, especially the European countries and South Korea and Japan and the countries that actually end up getting nominated or winning time and again, there's a lot of solidarity within their industry. So as soon as a film gets selected from Germany, every German Academy member comes together, they take the filmmaker out and they're like, how do we work together to make sure we get you nominated in the international film category?
Right.
Similarly in South Korea, similarly in Japan. I think India is one of those few places that still has to create that solidarity, create that environment where every voting member sort of supports you, you know?
Right.
So I think the first thing that you need to do is, as soon as you get nominated, as soon as you get India's entry, you need to make it to LA. And it's a problem that India selects films so late in the year, because we select only by October or September.
Right.
A lot of countries select by July. So you already have certain countries with a lot of money and a lot of money being put in by the government. And they're already, the filmmakers, the producers, the sales agents are already in LA starting screenings as early as August.
Right.
So by the time we went there, which was in October, right, by the time the film got, selected and we were assured that yes, it is your film that's going, there were other countries that had already done a lot of film and a lot of PR
cycle had
and stuff.
started.
Cycle had started and we were 1.5 months too late.
Right.
So all the editorial coverage at LA Times or
Variety
the Rap,
or
Variety or anything, any of the trades or any of the normal papers, those authors already had favorite films.
Right.
The publications there, they already had, movies that they wanted to support, ideas that they wanted to do. So by the time you go, it becomes challenging, because you have to understand, in that first lot, this year there were 98 films submitted from different countries.
Right.
There is no way that everyone can watch everything. So all you have to do is try to make your title stand out as much as possible and get as many voting members of the Academy to watch the film.
Sure.
Because you could get hundreds of thousands of people to watch it, but if you don't have Academy members watching it, you're not going to get those votes that'll take you into the shortlist round.
And how many members are in the Academy?
There's 10,000 and something, 10,000 and a few members overall.
Right.
But only, every year, only about 700 or 800 sign up for the International Film Voting Committee.
Right.
So it's not that every member of the Academy can vote for your film in the first round.
Right.
It has to be people who sign up, who write an email, like as a member, you have to write an email to the Academy saying, hi, I'm willing to sign up. And then you get assigned 8 movies of the 98.
Got it.
So there'll be 10 or 12 groups made. Each group gets assigned 8 films. And in that group, there'll be maybe 50 or 60 or 100 people, depending on how many people sign up for the International Film Voting Committee. And you'll have those people who will watch the film. And then only once they watch their 8, are they allowed to watch others. And they can watch how many films they want to, but then they have to vote for 15. And this year, there was a new voting system, which no one knew how to navigate, nor did our publicist, nor did our US distributor, because it was the first time they were doing it. And there was a lot of uncertainty with how exactly it works. But this year, they had a system where you vote your films 1 to 15. Earlier, all the way till this year, you'd have to rate films from 5 to 10.
Right.
So you'd say, this film 10 on 10, this film 6 on 10, 7 on 10.
Sure.
So if there was a time when someone loved 15 films, they could vote 15 films 10 on 10. But this year, you could love 15 films, but you can't vote all as number 1. You have to pick 1, 2, 3, 1
So it's
to
a graded
15.
scale.
It's a graded scale. So it's essentially like running a political campaign. It's nothing short of that.
Sure.
And you have certain films that are backed by certain studios and streamers, especially the streamers now, because you're essentially competing against tech money.
Right.
These streamers are spending between $6 to $8 million on their Oscar campaign. You know what I mean? Like, how do you even begin to compete against that? Like, Netflix spent on both their titles close to $15 million. Amazon spent $6-7 million. You can't, there is no competition.
Right.
So it's important that you start early. It's important that you have a US distributor. We had Samuel Goldwyn Films.
Right.
If you don't have a US distributor, it becomes very difficult because of various reasons. But essentially, you need to have, these basic things. And you need to lock a publicist. So now that's a whole other thing. I didn't know this about publicists. I thought, there'll be 5 or 6 publicists. You hire them, you pay them money because that's what you have to do, and they'll take your movie.
Sure.
But the Oscar publicists, and specifically the International Film Voting publicists, there are only 3 or 4 that are really good.
Right.
And they get way too many requests. So you have to pitch them your film, and only if they like it and if they feel they'll do a good job on it, they'll take it on.
Wow.
And they won't only take on 1 film, they'll take on 4 films. So you're fighting for their attention, to put attention onto your film with 4 other movies. So it's a very bizarre sort of business, and really the race is not about how good your film is, because you assume that every film that comes from every country will be good enough, as all our previous films that we've sent have been good.
Absolutely.
So it's not about as good, how good your film is. It's about how many people watch your film, how many voting members watch your film. And the way to do that is you'll have to call me and I will charge you money to tell you what I did. But it's really difficult to get people into screenings and to get them to watch your film.
That's
essentially
insane, man.
Yeah.
I know, from what I know about this, I know there have been campaigns where companies have sent out iPads and gifts and presents to Academy members to get their attention and make them feel like, oh shit, I must check this out.
Yeah.
So I know that it's not the most kosher ecosystem either.
But they're changing that. To give it to the Academy, they're changing that. Now you can't give any gifts. You're not allowed to. The day you give a gift, if someone reports it, you'll be barred.
Right.
And you won't be able to reapply as a producer, as a distributor. You won't be able to get back into reapplication. You'll be barred for 5-6 years. So that's taken out of the way. But you always find ways of attracting viewers to your screenings. Some people are doing screenings with like luncheons and with alcohol, with champagne. And, all that costs a lot of money. Each screening in LA without F&B will cost you $2,000 or $3,000 just to book a screen.
Wow.
And everything is all booked out. So by the time we went there, all the best screenings, everything was all booked out by the other films, right? Because you have to understand, the international film category is just one of the multiple categories.
Yeah.
And this has 98 movies that you're competing with. All the other categories, each of those guys are doing screenings. Each of those guys are trying to get attention. Each of them are trying to pitch themselves to LA Times or to the Wrap or to, the New York Times to get articles done.
Yeah.
So I don't blame the people who didn't cover us, because they just had so much to cover already,
Right.
So it's a bit of a jungle, and you have to really get in there as early as you can and essentially park yourself there and make shit happen.
That sounds really, really hard to do if you're 1.5 months late.
Absolutely.
Right? But
Absolutely.
man, congratulations.
Thank
I think not for the Oscar nom or the Oscar running, but for the film, right? I think I'm Gujarati. Like I said, even though I watched the film in Hindi because I didn't know I could search for Chhello Show on Netflix for the Gujarati print. I loved it, man.
Thank you.
Right? Like I said, Tribeca opening 122 screens, 125 screens.
In India?
In India?
In India, yeah. 150 screens in India.
150 screens?
Yeah.
Which is, for people who know, is not a huge amount for a mainstream film, but it's, I think, just the right amount for you to break through if people like your film and start talking about it, right?
Absolutely.
I think from there to the awards that you're winning. I think last week at Dios de Cinema, it was the Ultima Película.
The Ultima Película is the name of the Spanish title. Is our film as a Spanish title,
right?
And we won their main Spanish award, kind of like the César for France or the Oscar for Spain.
Right.
It's called the Días de Cine Awards, and it's a big television, all across, the national TV, and we won the best international film there, or the best. There was some category, but we won the best film there.
Love it. But you see how that's confusing, right? Ultima Película means final film, last film, great film. Fantastic stuff, man. I know you're getting distributed in multiple countries. Very prestigious Japanese distributors have picked up the film.
That's right.
What happens now, right? Like when you started the film, when Mr. Pan Allen was directing it, there must have been a certain vision for it, right? Like you said, the vision wasn't, oh, let's go to the Oscars.
Right.
The vision was, let's get this film out to as many people as possible. Let's tell this beautiful story to as many people as possible. But now that this kind of acclaim has come to you, and now that there's a run, what happens to the life cycle of a film because of this now?
Yeah, I think essentially the focus or the end goal of most filmmakers is to keep your film alive and in conversation for as long as possible.
Right.
When we were financing the movie, forget when we were writing it, because it's such a personal story to Nalin and it's so autobiographical. He's been writing it for many years, including from probably his childhood diaries and stuff, where he's taken a lot from. So when we really started financing it, which is what I would call the start of our journey, was probably around 2018, and now we're sitting in 2023, and there's still conversation happening around the film. So in that sense, it's a great feat. Obviously, I need to move on and find the next footing. But we actually released in Spanish cinemas, in German cinemas, in Taiwanese cinemas, and in Singaporean cinemas before we even released in Indian cinemas.
Oh, wow.
Before we could find distribution in India, we found distribution in all of these territories.
Right.
And we had already sold a bunch of other territories, including the US territory, to Samuel Goldwyn Films. Now, as much as I'd like to take credit for it as a producer, really, I think the film sold one, obviously it was a good film, and I think distributors will always want to watch a good film. But more than that, there's a lot of market value for a pan-Nullan movie in international markets. I didn't realize that, but there are only a handful, maybe 3 or 4 Indian filmmakers who sell to non-diaspora distributors.
Right.
Because most Indian films that sell abroad, that may do much more business than we did abroad, but they're sold to distributors who do Indian diaspora films, who focus on diaspora markets.
Sure.
So if you sell to America, they'll release in New Jersey, they'll release in, certain parts where there's Indian pockets and population, but they won't look at the rest of the country, and they won't look at trying to cross over into actual local audiences, right? Or, national, like local nationalities. So when we were financing the film, the historical comps that Nullan's earlier movie had, we knew that we were going to find distribution, but this was all in a pre-pandemic world, right? We knew we were going to find distributors who would pick up the film for certain territories, because traditionally all his films have sold to those territories.
Right.
Like Samsara did close to, I think, 35 million at the box office, back in 2001. Miramax distributed it. Same thing with Valley of Flowers, sold to 150 territories. His documentaries, like Faith Connections, also have done theatrical in like France and Spain. Like in France, it had almost 60,000 entries,
Oh, wow.
60,000 people going to the cinema to watch his documentary.
Right.
So there is this sort of like, when you go to Cannes, or if you go to any of the international markets, Berlin, EFM, and you say Pan Nullan, people recognize that name. They don't recognize a handful of other famous directors who've even had films at Cannes and, Berlin before. They don't know those names. They don't know those titles. So I think there was an inherent market built into that. Obviously, the pandemic hitting sort of changed that, because these were all traditionally theatrical distributors, and of course no one was going to the cinema for 2 years, and people had forgotten what it meant to go to the cinema. Everyone was used to just watching stuff at home, so there was no urgency to go back to the cinema, right? In a post-pandemic world. So we had to sort of find that market, and we were lucky that so many interesting distributors picked it up and found really cool ways of marketing the film and creating urgency in their own territory to bring people in. So while we had only 130 or 150 screens in India, we had 65 screens in Spain, or we had about 45 screens in Germany.
Right.
So overall, I'm just glad that, even in a post-pandemic world, we've been able to release in cinemas, because you've seen the film.
Of course.
The theme of the film is sort of an invitation back to the cinema. It's a celebration of this, communal viewing experience. And it was one of the reasons that I wanted to do the film, because when I grew up, while I was growing up, what made me fall in love with the movies was the ability to go to the cinema, stand outside, buy tickets in black, discuss with your friends after. And by the time I got to making movies, everyone was just watching content. It was no more movies, and it was called content, and people were watching it on their phone. And, I was like, all that's great. I've embraced the digital medium. As you know, our company's embraced it completely. But there was a little romantic side in me which said, no, I want people to go to the cinemas, take that effort and make it a ritualistic sort of pilgrimage to go and watch the movie.
For sure.
So that's what we were aiming to do.
I love it, man. I mean, absolutely love it. And having seen the film, I watched the film alone at home. My wife was out and I had a few hours to kill, and I'd been planning to watch it for a while. And I watched it alone, and it moved me a lot, dude. Like, the whole Cinema Paradiso vibe was awesome, but the earthiness of the storytelling really, really got to me, man. And it was a beautiful film, and I thought to myself as well, right, that, hey, man, I missed the opportunity to probably watch this with other young Gujarati folks who would relate to this as well as strongly as I did. And once again, congratulations. This is a thoroughly enjoyable film that has very uniquely Indian family values. It has very modern, progressive decisions that parents also make. I don't want to give too much away. It has a childlike innocence, yet it has a very artsy sort of vibe, especially in the climax sequence and the way that's been treated. People who are listening, go watch the film. It's a wonderful film. I promise that this is the halfway point of this episode, and this is as much we'll talk about Chhello Show on this episode. Go nowhere. We'll be back with Dheer Momaya right after these messages. And we're back. Dheer is still with us. We'll talk a little bit more about the other cool stuff that you've done at Jugaad. You did Pratik Kuhar's Cold Mess.
Yeah.
There was your wife's film, Namdev Bhav.
Yeah.
What is the sort of philosophy there, right? Because there seems to be a very interesting visual art treatment, yet there is very simple, real storytelling at the heart of it. The real storytelling that's sort of based in relationships and how relationships change characters and people. How do you pick projects? What do you look for? How do you do that while you're doing the stuff that you're doing at Jugaad?
Yeah, I mean, I think you said it right. The idea is to find stories that are relatable. First, they need to be, because it's so easy to say we want to get something relatable, but to write something relatable, any writer who writes something which is relatable, it will find an audience, right? And it's easier said than done. Like, I know sometimes when I sit down to write a concept or I sit down to write a brief or something, and I feel like, oh yeah, what I'm writing is totally relatable. When I reread it or when I pitch it to my, my brain trust that we have at Jugaad, just no one gets it. And you're like, okay, wait, you have to check yourself. And because sometimes you feel that you've written something that's beautiful and will connect to an audience, but it won't. So I think relatability is number one. And I think the second most thing is that we're chasing emotions. What I feel with a lot of young creators today is we're lost in a world of aesthetics where everything needs to be visually very stunning and beautiful, and as it needs to be, because, we're in the world of thumb stoppers. Otherwise, if you can't stop someone's thumb, they'll just scroll past you no matter how much effort or time you've put in. So the visual sort of draw is important, but really it needs to come down to emotion. And I feel like with Dheer's work, who's my wife, who's probably been the most prolific director that I've worked with, because it's the amount that she works and the amount of stuff that she does. I feel like what she naturally finds, and even though she's not Indian, she's Ukrainian and she's only been in India for 10 years, which is a long time, but she finds what Indians would, or what globally, what humans would find more relatable than I do, and I sometimes say that she's more Indian than I am because her thoughts that come out of her are more Indian than I am. But I feel like that's really what this elusive emotional beast is what we're trying to chase. And we started off doing independent cinema because our first movie, 3.5, was co-produced by Anurag Kashyap, and second movie, Namdev Bhau, which, did a bunch of festivals and, good sales. It was a super sort of alienating journey because independent production is a very lonely process. As is with most entrepreneurship sort of stories. Initially, it's very lonely because it's only me and Dheer sitting and sending emails to people trying to convince them to watch our film, whether it be programmers, distributors, buyers, across the board, or just even friends, I found that most of my friends don't watch my work. They're like, oh, enough of your film stuff, talk about what happened in 2003 when someone knocked someone out, that's the conversation that you end up having with your friends. So just first of all, convincing people to watch it. So at that point, we realized, let's do something that's more audience facing in India and understand the Indian audience. And we opened ourselves up to doing short format storytelling. And we happened to meet Pratik, who was doing an incredible album called Cold Mess. And we were like, this is incredible music, and music and film anyways are cousins of each other and build on top of each other. And he was really open to doing videos and stories and telling stories through his music and telling stories through his videos and using the medium and platform of music to bring film and video into that. And he's also very film literate, the movies that he watches, so we found a lot of synergy and we worked on Cold Mess. And I think that sort of snowballed into doing a lot more music videos, building long-term relationships with a lot of artists like Ritviz and who are now all very good friends because we realize that there's a sense of synergy in the musical storytelling that they're doing and in the film storytelling that we're doing, and just happened to be a good match. And
young people working together making art.
Yeah, that's basically it.
I love it.
Yeah,
I love it. Why did you call it Jugaad? I love the name. I think the concept of Jugaad, if taken right, is just super fertile and super efficient. But why did you call it Jugaad?
I've sometimes cursed myself for calling it Jugaad because I've been in clients' offices and they're like, "Arey, Jugaad kar lega." You don't need more money. So I've regretted it sometimes. But now, over the years, I think finally I've come to loving it myself. So when we were naming, we wanted to find a name for the company, and there were a lot of cool names that came to mind. I had an earlier production house with two friends of mine that was called Basket Case Productions.
Right. Are you a Green Day fan?
Is that a Green Day reference?
It's a Green Day song.
Okay, fine. I didn't realize that. My teacher used to call me a basket case in school.
Right. Okay.
So that's where it came. It came from like three misfits who didn't do anything in their life, and it was like, okay, basket cases come together to make film. And I wanted to find something that was Indian because basket case people don't really understand. And I wanted it to be niche because we are niche people. Like we're not going out and trying to attract a billion people with everything we do. But I also wanted it to be something that was relatable. And what I found on the first few things that we were producing, before we even had a name for the company, the one word that was flying around a lot on set was Jugaad. Jugaad kar lenge, arey Jugaad ho jayega, sir, aap tension mat lo, Jugaad ho jayega. And sometimes it didn't happen, but I sort of dived into the name, and it literally translates to frugal. What is it? There's a
frugal
title.
Innovation.
Yeah, frugal innovation for large problems, and you find like cheap fixes for it. So that's essentially what I found. I was doing a lot. So I said, why not just call it Jugaad? And And it's been quite interesting because a lot of people even internationally know the word Jugaad. I didn't assume that. I thought it would be difficult to explain to people, but people do because they've read like the Harvard Business Review, and a bunch of people have done ideas on how Jugaad is used in manufacturing and stuff. So it turned out to be good, and it always brings a chuckle out of people. And sometimes when you're on screen and the name pops up, often I see, and I'm looking at people's reactions, because when I'm watching a movie, and especially my own movie in a cinema, I'm never watching the movie, I'm just looking at the people. I'm like, oh, did he laugh there? Did he know I'm taking notes? And they often smile and chuckle when Jugaad pops up. So I'm glad now I'm living with it, and I hope we can build the brand further.
I'm sure you can, man. And I think why I love the phrase Jugaad, and you're right. I think that Harvard case and generally India's done a great job of branding Jugaad and as part of our national fabric in that sense, right? But I love it because it provides the hope that वो हो जाएगा. Right? वो होगा या नहीं, finality is different. But Jugaad provides a sort of hope कि ये हो जाएगा. You know what I'm saying? And that hope is important. I think, and that's what I took away from seeing Jugaad Motion Pictures there. And that's, it's a lovely name. Man.
And basically we want to hit the ground running, regardless of, because we want to achieve.
Exactly.
So it's just like, we'll do something or the other, but we will make something happen. That's the point.
Yeah. There's an unstoppable quality to Jugaad. You know what I'm saying? That's beautiful. Tell me this, man. Let me go into a bit of history for you. How did you start getting into the business of making entertainment?
Good question. I actually studied biotechnology in college, but I'd had enough of doing 30-hour lab weeks and spending time.
Was that in India?
No, that was actually in Manchester.
Oh, right.
Yeah, I did my undergrad there.
Are you a football fan?
I'm not, no.
Okay, great.
Everyone asked me that and they're like, oh, are you a United fan? No, I never went to a game.
I am.
Oh, damn, you have a tattoo.
I have a tattoo, man.
I never ended up going to a game either, so you probably hate me. But,
no, I don't.
Okay,
it's all right, because I haven't been to a game.
Okay, fine.
It's all right.
Okay, good. Then, So, I couldn't do it any longer. And I was like, I can't sit in a lab, 30 hours a week trying to figure out which protein is going to be the next, which amino acid is going to create the next peptide chain. But I dropped out. I came back and I studied business management at a college here in Bombay. And I didn't know what to do. I didn't know what I was doing in my life. And I used to always read and write a lot. So I used to always read a lot of philosophy, psychology. I was a bit of a leftist Marxist for a few years. Loved Karl Marx, Das Kapital, and just generally, believed that there was a change that could come to society through socialism. Then I read Ayn Rand, Atlas Shrugged, and shot all the socialism out of my ass. And then I'm suddenly now an objectivist. So I realized that I'm constantly just changing my political views. And I realized that more than having one political view, I just enjoy being part of conversations and the human sort of need to express themselves. So then I started writing a bit more than I used to, and I enjoyed what I was writing. And I found friends who were working in film and television and all, and they sort of lured me in and they were like, look, what you're writing is good, why don't you come? But the first job they gave me was of a janitor. They were like, we're gonna, because my friend ran a production house that did ads, and he was like, yeah, but you don't know anything, so you just come and you clean stuff. That's what your job is going to be, to make sure that the set is clean, because that's what you have to learn from. So that was my first job in film, and I really enjoyed it. I loved being on set, and I was always a visual person because I used to take a lot of photographs, and I loved the whole 35mm aesthetic. And so I always realized that I had a visual medium inside me, but I didn't know how to channelize it.
Right.
And then I discovered, a lot of people say, oh, I grew up watching Tarkovsky and Ozu, and none of that. For me, it was none of that. I grew up on Bollywood and Hollywood and a little bit of, somewhere here and there, maybe something I would have watched. I hadn't been to a film festival.
Right.
So it was only after I decided to do film that someone told me, he's like, oh, have you watched Iranian cinema? And I was like, no, should I? And he was like, yeah, you should. And then started the deep dive into essentially film. Because once I discovered Abbas Kiarostami, I was like, oh wait, now there's Jafar Panahi, and I was like, oh wait, there's Kurosawa, but there's also Ozu, and then there's the Italian neorealists, and then the French, and then I just got blown away, and I spent all my time, 2 years, just watching movies to educate myself and reading books, because I didn't go to film school. My father very clearly told me, he said, I will only pay for college and I will only pay for education if it's in the sciences. Anything outside that, you pay for yourself. So even my business management... Indian dads, right? And I thank him as well for it, because he was like, you don't want to study, don't study. You want to study film or philosophy. I want to study PPE, politics, philosophy, economics.
Right.
He said, study at home. You don't need to go to college. You buy the books, read it, go online discussions and do it.
Yeah.
So he was very supportive. Even though my film career was always supportive. But yeah, so somehow then I managed to latch myself onto people and creators and, conversations, and slowly. And then I had my first job in Bollywood where I assisted Ashutosh Gowarikar on a movie called Mohenjo-daro. I was an assistant director.
Sure.
And then I was like, this is great. He was a perfect film school for me because I needed that on-set experience. And then I set up my own company. So I had one job and then I set up my own company.
Love it, man.
Yeah.
Love it. That's quite a journey.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm guessing James Monaco to Ashutosh Gowarkar. It's beautiful. It's fantastic, man. I love it. Let me ask you this as we sort of wrap around this. You've seen tremendous amount of success for someone who hasn't been to film school or of course, you've spent time and effort. What impact are you looking at having as a creative individual? Sure, as a business person as well in the film space, and all business people want one kind of impact, which is paisa banna chahiye. You shouldn't be,
True.
Making impact at a loss. But as a creative individual, what is the kind of impact you're looking at having?
There are some filmmakers who are like activist filmmakers. They
Sure.
have like I have a friend of mine, Devashish Makhija. He might kill me if I say he's an activist filmmaker because he's just a filmmaker. But he makes these deeply political films that move him, that sort of are very difficult sometimes to watch because of the material and the subjects that he touches upon. And then you have certain filmmakers who just want to do romance and find a way to make the world a happier place. I don't know what impact I want to have. I don't know if I can have an impact. I just know this. I want to do cool shit and I want to do shit that excites me, and I want to be able to be in a position where I can make what I want to.
Sure.
As long as I'm in that position, I think I'll always find something interesting to say through my work. Right now, I think the biggest problem that the film industry is facing is that there's no urgency to go to the cinema.
Right.
There's no urgency to come to a title and watch it today, Sometimes something's come out on the streaming platforms and, your friends are like, oh, you have to watch it today.
Right.
That's what I want to be. I want to be in everything that I make. I want each person to go and tell the next person, oh, you haven't seen it, you have to watch it today.
Right.
Because I find myself doing that to people. And I feel like as long as I'm part of that conversation for every little bit of work that I do, I've achieved what I wanted to.
And who do you do that about?
Good question. I think, there's so many young Indian creators who I want to work with. Like my friend Shaunak Sen has a documentary called All That Breathes, which has been nominated for the Oscar.
Of course.
Beautiful movie. I really would love to work with him because I think the kind of storytelling that he does and the approach that he has to like structural storytelling is incredible. There's another girl, Kartiki, who has a film called The Elephant Whisperers,
right,
which is also nominated. I'm just talking about the nominees now. But like that, there are so many young creators and storytellers that I want to work with. And similarly from there's Darren Aronofsky off the top of my head, who I think would be an incredible person to work with because the way he approaches certain type of material just flips it on its head and gives it that, that authorship that I require. There's Spike Jones, who brings this in, just quirky, the Daniels, who did Everything Everywhere All at Once, but earlier had done Swiss Army Man. And so I feel like I just know that in this day and age, you want to make kick-ass movies and I just want to continue making and that's the thing. What I find is that you can't wait for inspiration to hit you. You can't wait for creators to come to you. You can't wait for stories to come to you. You have to actively be looking. And then around every corner, there's a bit of inspiration. Around every corner, there's a singer, songwriter. And what I've seen is that the young generation today, especially the 15 to 21 year olds, they're multi-hyphenated talents. I'm just doing a show right now, a series, which is a young adult drama comedy.
Right.
We finished filming and we've found a cast which are all new. They've never been on screen before. Right. Similarly to what Last Film Show, you saw the kids of Last Film Show, like Samay, right? Who plays Bhavin Rabadi plays him. What an incredible talent. He's a great rapper. He's a great singer.
Really?
He's a great dancer. Yeah. We couldn't explore any of that in this film.
Right.
But I have to be able to create an ecosystem for him to exploit his own talent,
It's amazing.
He can be a superstar.
Right.
And as soon as you start looking outside your typical, Bombay, Delhi, casting circles of, people who are coming to be actors, you start looking outside. Obviously, there's a lot of good talent, but you open your eyes outside that. While we were doing the show, we casted these 15 to 21-year-old, this great ensemble cast. All of them are multi-hyphenated talents.
Right.
Some of them are designers, singers, songwriters, and now they're actors, and they're happy to do everything.
Can you tell me the name of what that show is going to be called?
Not yet.
Not yet?
Because
Okay.
I'd piss off my streaming partners
Sure.
because I don't know when they want to announce it, but not the name yet. But it'll be out mid next year, and it will, I think, at least the way it's shaping up now, it should be a definitive piece for young adults
I'm
in
going
India.
to edit the headline and say, Dheer Momaya's untitled next film. He's not going to give the name out, but I'm joking. But I love the sense of responsibility and ownership that sort of flows from the way you're looking at this entire thing, right? And that's refreshing.
Yeah.
I've spoken to producers who've been in the game for a long, long time, and they're looking at things very differently. I'm sure they feel the same pain of audiences not responding to the way to the films the way that they used to, right? I mean, Pathan notwithstanding at this point, and Pathan is like, it's not just a film, right? It's a meta narrative about a man and his struggle and whatever else is going on. It's much more than a film, but everyone else is struggling, right? And here you are talking about going beyond and talking about creating ecosystems and working with a bunch of the next big things that might come out of Indian cinema, and taking those chances on stories that seem like their heart is in the right place. So I feel very encouraged by hearing you talk about this. Let me ask you a couple more things that at this point are just stock questions on this podcast, right? Like, if any time I have an accomplished filmmaker sitting across me, I have to ask them this question, right? But I'll evolve the question a little bit because of Chhello Show and what you've just told me about the international film market and how it's responding to Indian films. How far behind are we from South Korea?
That was specific. I think that the sort of renaissance that Korean, or not renaissance, but the naissance, like the birth of Korean content that's traveling the world, goes hand in glove with the music, the food, the movies, and everything coming together, the K-dramas.
The whole Hallyu wave.
Everything. People in Bombay, like small town kids who were on my thing, on my show, they're talking about bibimbap and stuff, and I'm like, what's going on? How is this? Like, South Korea, no one's talking about paneer tikka, right? Or like chicken tikka.
Man, I'll tell you what, right? The first time I went to Seoul, I actually had an award-winning chicken samosa there. But that's a story for another time.
That's amazing. I'd love to hear about that. But I don't think we're far behind. I think that we're at an inflection point. We're at the cusp.
Sure.
The problem is we have been for many years.
Right.
So it feels like, we were at a cusp 10 years ago, but we're still at a cusp, so kuch ho nahi raha hai. But I think it's the responsibility of young creators to make content, whether it's song, whether it's music, film, or whatever they're making, or series, or docus, unscripted, scripted, whatever, to make stuff that are hyper-local and true to your personality as a country, or true to your culture as a country, but with global themes.
Sure.
What often happens is we end up making beautiful films and beautiful songs that work really well within the industry, and those need to continue happening because we are, at the end of the day, proud of our heritage. But sometimes they get lost thematically.
Right.
They're very specific to something that's very Indian, and then they sort of get lost,
Right.
So if you make something that's very structured politically, and you're, sort of going into the Indian politics, it's great for India, but it'll be very difficult for anyone else to understand. And in today's day and age, you want things that are easily sort of consumable, right?
Sure.
Which move you and can be thought-provoking, so in that sense may not be easy to watch, but which are, sort of, they just play through. So I feel like finding stories that are, we can't copy. We're not going to be able to do we're not going to be able to do what K-pop did or what K-dramas do by copying what they've done or by adapting what they've done. What we need to find is our authenticity, our story, and that's what Chhello showed, and that's what Nalin is one of those few filmmakers, and why I love working with him and why I loved working with him on this is that he's one of those few filmmakers who is very deeply rooted in his reality, because he comes from there, right? He comes from Chalala. He comes from that small village. His father owned a chai stall on a station. So that's where the guy comes from. A ketli, chai ketli, right? So, and the chai ketli that you see in the film and the dabba are actually his father's. They've kept it because he's kept it all these years. He said, that's where all our money came from, so I'm not going to throw it, right? So you find someone who's so deeply rooted in his being and understanding, but has spent time, years, 20, 30 years studying the world, traveling, not going to like, I just went to New York or I just went to Korea. No, going into like the small, off the beaten paths, understanding what is actually human in everybody, what is common in all humans. And as soon as you find what's common and you're able to use your, authentic sort of cultural nuance, and you find what's common, you match those together, you're at a global industry.
Right.
And that's what Hollywood has done time and again. Because what Hollywood has done is they've empowered creators from the world to come there and tell their story. It's not always white American people, or it could be white, but it's just not American people who are telling their stories.
Sure.
They have writers who've come from Germany, from Spain. So suddenly you have talent that's from all over the world that's telling a story that is American, because they're setting it in America. It's English language, but it's relatable to everybody.
Right.
And that's, I think, what Korea has done extremely well. Like even with Parasite, for example, why did Parasite work? That's a film that could happen anywhere. It's a class story.
Absolutely.
And Bong Joon-ho is someone who's explored the class struggle in a lot of movies, all the way from Snowpiercer to, Okja to here.
Yeah.
So you understand that this person finds different ways, different structures to tell a similar theme, which everyone is facing today, So I think that...
And which I think is true to his life experience and the way he sees the world as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right? What did you think of Decision to Leave?
I watched it and then I decided to leave. No, I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. The problem is, I did watch it, but I watched it when I was on the Oscar campaign trail.
Sure.
So I didn't have the mind space to watch any of my competitors' films.
Right.
Like I watched it and I love Park Chan-wook's movies because Old Boy is one of my favorite movies of all time.
Right?
So in fact, I thought it would make it to the nomination because there are so many people who just would vote for Park Chan-wook based on his body of work. But I was really surprised. The amount of money they spent also was a lot. Korea spends a lot of money. CJ and there's a lot of people who are putting money behind that campaign. And the fact that it didn't get nominated was surprising.
Yeah.
Not to say that the other films that got nominated didn't deserve it, but that and even Inaritu, Bardo.
Right.
Now Inaritu is like 2-time Oscar winner. Just in his repertoire of cast and crew, he'll have like 50, 60, maybe 100 Academy voting members.
Sure.
So the fact that even Inaritu didn't get nominated, and here two big films where a lot of money was spent on the campaign, I was kind of like taken aback. But answering your question, I felt Decision to Leave was a beautifully crafted film. So the tonality was incredible. I felt like the story itself was like a 1 hour or a half-hour TV episode crime drama,
Sure.
Not to say that that's bad. I think I need to rewatch it now that we're no more in competition. And I think I'll fall in love with it all over again.
Right.
But when I watched it, I was obviously looking for the faults because I was like, hey, why do I deserve it more than he does? And then I was looking at it, I found this sort of structural view that I had on it. Did you like it?
I loved it.
Oh, good. Yeah.
I loved it. I did think that it wasn't the finest putting together of the film,
Right.
but the visual style, the tonality, like you said, right? Like it made me feel like I was watching a Korean Andhadhun. If you know what I mean, right? Slightly different tonality, slightly different visual texture,
Right.
but a similar life space, right? And that's just what I felt about it. Again, but I really enjoyed it. I think it was a good, fun film to watch, right? And rarely do you see tragic films and come out saying that was fun to watch.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
True.
Right. So,
and unfortunately, we're in the profession where we profit of tragedy. We profit of our own sort of life experiences, whether they're traumatic, whether they're happy. So it's a weird business, It's very few people are in this bizarre business where you profit of the negative and the positive equally, right?
Right.
So every experience you have can turn into some sort of storytelling. And I feel like, if you tap in deep enough and you look inside deep enough without trying to get philosophical or intellectual about the work and about the storytelling, which is also you're always at risk at doing. Without doing that, if you can just look inside and write something that's personal to you, it'll find a global audience. As long as you truly believe it. That's the thing.
absolutely, man. Fantastic talking to you.
Thank you.
This is a masterclass in young people making movies and how that can have an impact. And I wish you all the best for all the amazing stuff that I'm sure you'll do at Jugaad, man. Absolute pleasure having you on the show. I hope you had fun.
I did.
I want to ask you one last question before I let you
please.
go. And it's going to be recommendations.
Okay.
Right? Something that you've recently seen, heard, read that you'd want to leave behind for my listeners to consume. Played also if you're into video games.
I'm not very into video games. I've recently played Ghosts of Tsushima.
Oh, yeah.
And I just met one of my friends who I've made on through this trip was the composer of Skyrim. And Skyrim is like a incredible game.
Right.
So I played a little bit of Skyrim, loved that. First time gamer, so I wouldn't claim that. I'll go with books because I think that I feel like more people need to read a little more than they do, especially young filmmakers and writers. So if any of them are listening to this, non-fiction, I would go with Shoe Dog, which is Phil Knight's story. Easy to read, but really inspirational. It's actually that and No Rules by Reed Hastings.
Of course.
Both are mandatory reading for anyone who joins Jugaad.
Right.
And now we have a team of about 15 people or 16 people, and everyone has to read both those books when they join. From fiction, I recently read, I love Milan Kundera, and I'd read a lot of books around, but I hadn't read The Unbearable Lightness of Being.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, which was incredible.
Did you enjoy it?
I loved it. Oh my
man.
God, it blew me away.
Have you read The Art of the Novel?
I haven't read The Art of the Novel. I've read Laughable Loves.
Right.
Yeah. You read Art of the Novel?
Oh, man. Art of the Novel.
That's my next book.
I know this is not about me, but Art of the Novel gave me my foundational structure to evaluate anything that I read or consume or watch, right?
Wow.
I mean, that book is wonderful. I mean, you check it out, find it. I know you'll love it because obviously you're a storyteller and he just lays out his philosophy of structuring stories.
Right.
Right? It's just beautiful. But Milan Kundera, what a legend.
Milan Kundera, any book, I would say.
What a legend, yeah.
And I would say last one, perhaps Italo Calvino.
Right.
There's a beautiful book called Invisible Cities.
Sure.
Which I think was a great recommendation. My wife recommended it to me, changed my life.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Love it. Fantastic, man. Thanks so
All
much
right.
once again.
Thank you so much
for being on the show. That's it on this episode of Storytellers and Storysellers. Thank you for tuning in. Thank you for listening to us talk to Dheer about all the cool stuff that he's doing. If you enjoyed this chat, go outside. Tell everyone on the street that you like this podcast. Tell everyone. I'm not even joking. Tell your fruit wala, tell your doodh wala, tell your watchman, right? Tell your friends and rate this show on Spotify or Apple Podcasts or wherever else you're listening. It helps us get discovered. It helps us take the stories behind the stories from amazing people like Dheer to a wider audience. Thank you once again to the team at IVM that helps put this show together. This is it. This is Vineet Kanabar saying goodbye.